Have you ever imagined that in a situation of danger, the greatest enemy of the criminal can be something totally unexpected? Perhaps something he has never considered as a threat, something that is right there in nature itself, ready to rebel against those who try to destroy it. It sounds like a movie scene, but the truth is that stories like this happen in real life, and what you will discover now may surprise you. An escape that seemed promising, an attempt to escape risk and violence, turned out to be a real nightmare for those who believed they were in control of everything. And the most striking thing, everything happened because of one simple, almost invisible detail, which became the turning point of this dramatic story. Have you ever been in a situation where everything seemed to be under control until an unexpected detail completely changed the course of events? This narrative brings exactly that, a reversal of roles that defies logic and expectation of those who watch. What makes this account even more intriguing is the fact that often the forces of nature remain silent and calm until provoked. And when that happens, the reaction can be as fast as a spark, as fierce as a storm. In this case, nature decided to manifest itself in a way that no one could predict or control, and the result was a real lesson that fate can be ruthless. Are you curious how a simple movement can trigger such an impactful chain of events? And how, just at the hour when the criminal believed he was free, did nature itself teach him the lesson he never expected? Stay with me until the end, because this story will hold you from beginning to end, and what you will discover now may change your perspective on the power of nature and the unpredictability of fate. Get ready, because the next part reveals exactly the moment that turned everything upside down, a scene that will leave you jaw-dropping. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most, or any experience you have had that shows how unpredictable and powerful nature can be. Your opinion is very important, because it is she who makes this channel grow and reach more people who, just like you, are interested in real stories, life lessons, and amazing phenomena. In addition to sharing your impressions, be sure to like the video, as this helps to disseminate this content and keep the channel active, always bringing stories that make us reflect on the world around us. And if you want to continue following this type of narrative, subscribe to the channel. Thus you stay on top of everything we are preparing, with stories that show that life is full of surprises, often very close to us, and that the force of nature can be an ally or an unpredictable adversary. Your participation here is what makes all of this happen, strengthening this community of people who are curious, attentive, and aware of the power the natural world has to teach us, sometimes in ways we never imagined. Now, let's move on, because there is still so much more to this story that will make you even more aware of the lessons that life offers. The scene unfolded in the light of an ordinary day, but the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. On a busy street, where the movement of people seemed to follow their usual rhythm, a man with a cold look and determined posture advanced with quick steps, holding a victim against his will. The sound of conversations, the noise of passing vehicles, and the buzz around seemed to be silenced by the weight of the situation. The victim, with her face marked by fear, tried to understand what had happened, desperate and without the strength to react. Every step she took was guided by the invader, who seemed to believe he was in control of everything, as if he had a well-defined plan and a clear advantage in his head. The criminal had a posture of one who believed that nothing could stop him at that moment. The weapon he held in his hand conveyed a sense of power, a constant threat that kept people at a distance. He seemed to be aware of every movement around him, as if he had planned every detail of the action. The fear on the victim's face was evident, but there was also a mixture of confusion as she still tried to comprehend what was happening, while the man next to her seemed unmoved, focused only on her escape. The rush was visible. The hurried footsteps among the trees, the leaves that moved in the wind, all seemed to be part of an escape that he believed to be unbeatable. The road he chose to escape seemed, at that moment, a victory route. For him, it was as if everything was under his command, an opportunity to disappear into the closed forest, where no one could easily reach him. He believed his speed, combined with the isolation of the forest, would give him the ultimate advantage. The surrounding environment, which normally brought tranquility, became the scene of a desperate race. Each accelerated step, each tree that passed by him, reinforced the illusion that his escape route was free of obstacles. However, what seemed to be a foolproof strategy was beginning to reveal its weaknesses. The feeling of total control, which seemed to dominate the man at that instant, began to turn into a hidden risk. Like a rope that tightens until it breaks, nature, silent and patient, waited for the right moment to act. And just at that moment, a small detail, a leaf, a branch, became the catalyst for an unexpected change. Without realizing it, the criminal stepped in the wrong way, knocking over a branch that rested on a nest of marimbondos. The sound of the impact echoed in the forest, a silent warning that nature itself decided to use as its instrument of reaction. From that moment on, history took a completely different turn. The insects, which until then had only been there, quietly began to act. A cloud of enraged marimbondos came out of the nest, a flood of natural revenge that was launched against those who disturbed them. The aggression was swift, fierce, and relentless. The insects began to pursue the man with a fury that seemed to come out of an action movie, stinging him incessantly, as if they wanted to punish him for having invaded his sacred space. The scene turned into a real battle between the human being and the impact of the force of nature, a confrontation that no one could predict, especially the criminal who, in a few seconds, saw his escape turn into a desperate race for survival. Meanwhile, the victim, relieved to finally free himself from the hands of the kidnapper, took advantage of the moment to flee, seeking refuge in the opposite direction. His race was one of almost indescribable relief, a sense of freedom won almost miraculously. The scene looked like a movie script, but it was the harsh reality of a story that showed how unforgiving fate is for those who defy natural forces. The criminal, in turn, desperately tried to drive away the insects, shaking his arms and screaming in pain, while the marimbondos continued their merciless revenge. At that moment, everything seemed to be reversed, as if life itself was playing a heavy lesson, revealing that the balance between man and nature is more fragile than many imagine. This role reversal, where the criminal who believed he was in control was completely overwhelmed by the impact of the action itself, leads us to reflect on how much our decisions can turn into traps. The journey of that man became a clear example that the force of nature is often hidden in the simplest details, ready to react when we least expect it. And at the same time, it is a reminder that no matter how much we try to manipulate or control the environment around us, there will always be elements that can surprise us in ways we would never have imagined. This story, marked by a lesson in impact and transformation, reinforces that fate, no matter how hard we try to escape, often finds us in the most unexpected places. And when you think about all this, the question remains, to what extent are we really in charge of our own choices? The answer, perhaps, is hidden behind the scenes of what happens in our daily routine, where nature and chance meet to show us the hidden truth behind every decision. The man, believing that he had escaped danger, entered the heart of the forest with firm, almost unpunished steps, as if he had conquered unshakable territory. For him, the closed forest was his refuge, his secret hiding place where he could disappear without a trace, far from the reach of any watchful eye or outside forces. He pulled the victim hard, trying to speed up the pace, while the dense silence around seemed to reinforce his false sense of control. Each broken branch under his feet seemed a sign of his superiority, a proof that his escape strategy was infallible. But inside, adrenaline and fear still pulsed strong, although his expression of coldness tried to hide this vulnerability. His mind worked fast, thinking about what he would do next as if nature were just a silent ally, an extension of his own will. However, no matter how hard he tried to maintain the appearance of dominance, the hidden truth was that he had put himself in an invisible trap. The forest, with its dense vegetation, had its own secrets and dangers. The false feeling of invincibility, created by his own arrogance, caused him to ignore the subtle signs of the environment around him. The dry branches, the leaves that moved in the wind, everything seemed to be watching, waiting for the right moment to react. The forest, which in normal life is a place of tranquility and connection with nature, became the scene of a silent battle where every wrong move could be fatal. To him, it seemed that he had everything under control, that his escape was a well-planned and foolproof strategy, but in fact he was just playing with much greater forces than he imagined. The victim, in turn, tried to remain calm, despite the racing heart. Her heavy breathing was a reflection of the fear that consumed her as she tried to figure out where it was all going to go. She realized that the situation was more complex than it seemed. that this man, even with his appearance of strength, also carried a vulnerability that made him even more dangerous. His every move felt like a gamble, a risky move that could end in an unexpected way. And in that forest of shadows and whispering sounds, the feeling that everything could change at any moment began to settle in their heads. The false security of the criminal, believing that he had the advantage, led him to ignore essential details. Like prey that finds itself too secure in the web of the predator, he believed himself invulnerable, oblivious to the fact that nature itself could turn against him. And that's exactly what started happening. The forest, silent and patient, kept its own secrets, ready to reveal itself at the right time. The wrong move, the misstep, could be the trigger for a chain reaction. And it was precisely this hidden vulnerability that manifested itself in an unexpected way, making it clear that no matter how hard one tries to manipulate the environment or the situation, there are forces that remain beyond human control. The sense of dominance, which seemed so solid, began to unravel as reality revealed itself. The man who saw himself as the protagonist of his own story now found himself hostage to a scenario that he himself had created. Each tree, each leaf, seemed to be waiting for its moment to act, to return the impact that it had caused by invading that space. Thus the forest became an active character, a silent force that, at the right time, would change the course of everything. And with that, the trajectory of that criminal who believed he was in charge began to turn into a journey of transformation and revelations from which he would not leave unscathed. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the dynamics between man and the natural environment reveals much more than a simple escape. It is a lesson in resistance, in adaptation, in how our decisions, however small they may seem, can trigger a chain of reactions that are beyond our control. At that moment, what seemed to be an escape strategy turned into a real lesson in humility, in the face of the impact of the environment and the forces that often remain invisible, but that have the power to transform any scenario. And it is precisely this revelation that leads us to reflect on the behind the scenes of our own actions, on the impact that our decisions have on everything around us, even when we think we are in absolute command. This story, marked by a reversal of roles, reveals that no matter how hard we try to manipulate fate, there is a hidden force that reminds us that true mastery lies in harmony with the natural world and in the understanding that our actions have consequences that can be unpredictable and unforgiving. But fate had other plans. While the man advanced in despair, trying to escape the fury of the marimbondos, his attention was focused only on his own survival, in an attempt to free himself from the chaos he himself had caused. But in his haste to escape, he missed a crucial detail. A fallen log, twisted by time, stretched out in front of him. One simple movement, one wrong step, and that trunk became an invisible trap. Passing through it, the criminal bumped into a rotten branch which, due to its fragility, broke off with a subtle, barely noticeable noise. And it was in that instant that everything changed. The sound of the splitting branch echoed in the silent forest, awakening something that had hitherto remained hidden. As if it were an automatic reaction, an ancestral response to the invasion of their sacred space, a nest of marimbondos, which until then had been hidden in the shade of a tree, began to move. Its inhabitants, who stood there in silence, waiting for the moment to defend their territory, reacted with a fury that seemed to come out of a primitive force. The impact of the rotten branch, which fell next to the nest, was enough to trigger the defense reaction. Like an impact barrier, dozens of insects sped out, forming a giant cloud of enraged marimbondos, determined to punish anyone who threatened them. The scene quickly turned into a real scene of chaos. The man, who until then desperately tried to flee, found himself surrounded by a flood of aggressive insects, which mercilessly stung, as if each attack was a punishment for his act of invasion. His cries of pain mingled with the noise of his frantic rushes to ward off the marimbondos as he tried to shake the insects from his arms and head. Each bite seemed to burn like fire, a clear message that nature does not accept being disturbed without consequences. And as he struggled, the victim, who had managed to escape that nightmare, watched from afar with a mixture of relief and amazement, realizing that often the impact of our own action can be what knocks us down at the most unexpected moment. That moment of reversal of roles showed, in a crystal clear way, that the real impact did not come only from fear or violence, but from a chain of decisions that, when taken carelessly, can open doors to irreversible consequences. The man, who had been in control, was now held hostage by a force he had no way of stopping. The marimbondos, with their natural fury, showed that the impact of a misguided action can turn into a real lesson in humility. What seemed like a safe and planned escape has become a battle of survival, a lesson that reinforces the importance of reflecting before acting, of understanding that our decisions can generate effects that we cannot foresee or control. And it is exactly at this point that the deepest revelations begin to emerge, because in fact this story is not just about a man and insects, but about the very essence of how life works, how our actions, however minor they may seem, have an impact that reverberates behind the scenes of what we call destiny. Every choice, every step, carries a load of consequences that we often only realize when it's too late. And as we observe this scene, it becomes clear that true transformation happens when we recognize how much we are part of a larger system, where invisible forces, such as the impact of our decisions, can turn the most predictable scenario into something totally unpredictable. The force of nature, often silent, proves unforgiving at the right time, and this revelation invites us to reflect on our own journey, because deep down, we are all connected by an invisible web of causes and effects, where every action we take is a seed that can germinate in ways we can't even imagine. And this story, with its high-tension moment, reminds us that the impact of a simple action, like walking past a rotten branch, can set off a chain of events that change everything from one hour to the next. Just like that man, we are all vulnerable to forces acting beyond our control, and this understanding is the first step to true inner transformation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the impact of our actions, especially when we are faced with unpredictable situations, reveals a hidden truth, that life is a journey of continuous choices, where each step can open or close doors to what will come next. And this invisible connection between cause and effect is the key to understanding that our decisions, however small they may seem, carry a huge responsibility in the construction of our destiny. What happened there in the forest is just one extreme example, but it serves as a wake-up call for all of us. Because in the end, true transformation is born from the understanding that we are not isolated in the world, and that the forces that surround us, nature, the universe, or even our own inner selves, are always waiting for the right moment to show us that the impact of our actions has a consequence that we cannot ignore. In a matter of seconds, the silence that once dominated the forest was broken by a high-pitched, incessant sound, a deafening hum that seemed to tear the air. A cloud of marimbondos, moving like a mass of living fire, came out of the nest with merciless fury. Their small bodies, but charged with an ancestral aggressiveness, rushed at the invader with frightening speed. Each insect had a clear intention to defend its home, and the reaction was brutal. Hundreds of them fell on the man, forming a mass of painful bites that spread to his arms, face, neck, and even the trunk. His movements were desperate, an attempt to get rid of that voracious attack. But the amount of insects was immense, and the strength of his aggression seemed to have no limits. He screamed, a sound of pure desperation, as he tried to shake the marimbondos off himself, but the barrage of stings only increased. Every blow, every movement of fending off insects seemed like a drop in an ocean of fury. His arms were marked with red and inflamed marks, a sign that each bite was a provocation to his resistance. His desperate run, at first an attempt to escape, turned into a struggle against the very chaos he himself had caused. The surrounding woods seemed to turn into a vengeful entity, chastising him for his invasion. Dry branches and leaves that were once only obstacles have now become instruments of punishment, either by being hit or by hindering their attempt to escape. The scene became a scene of horror, a chaos that seemed to have no end. The man, overcome by panic, no longer had control. His screams were mixed with the incessant sound of insects, which continued to sting endlessly, as if they wanted to punish him for his arrogance. His vision began to blur, the pain intensified, and his movements became increasingly uncoordinated. The force of the marimbondos' attack was almost a natural manifestation of a greater force, a punishment that the forest itself seemed to be sending to anyone who dared to invade its sacred space. At that moment, reality became a succession of chaotic images, a clear demonstration that nature, when provoked, reacts ruthlessly and mercilessly. And as the man struggled, desperately trying to find a refuge, the scene remained fast-paced, almost like an action movie scene where chaos becomes an overwhelming force. Each sting felt like a message that he had overstepped boundaries, that his arrogance had put him in the position of a victim of that force that, until then, had remained silent. The frantic movement of shaking off the insects, the attempt to run, everything was a reflection of his own defeat in the face of the impact of his decisions. The forest, which was once a hiding place, became a weapon of punishment, a natural punishment that does not forgive those who invade its spaces without respect. That moment of absolute chaos made it clear that in nature, the impact of an action has a direct, rapid, and often ruthless response. There is no room for mercy when the balance is disrupted. The strength of the swarm of marimbondos has shown that often the true impact comes not only from human actions, but also from the invisible reactions that natural life itself reserves for those who challenge its rules. The criminal now was living proof that despair is not enough to escape the impact our own decisions can unleash. Every sting, every movement of escape reinforced the hidden truth that life at its purest essence is a journey of reactions and consequences, a narrative of cause and effect that often reveals itself only at the most critical hour. And as we watch that chaos unfold, it becomes clear that the impact of the action is not a mere coincidence, but a force that acts behind the scenes of our destiny, often silently, until it manifests itself in a definitive way. What seemed like a safe escape turned into a battle of resistance, where the environment itself showed that at any moment, the impact of our choices can return in full force, changing everything in a matter of seconds. This dramatic experience reinforces that, beyond what we can see or imagine, there is a universe of invisible forces that determine the course of our trajectory, and that true transformation is born from the understanding that our actions have weight, impact, and often consequences that we only realize when we are already in the midst of chaos. While the swarm of marimbondos continued to attack with a wild fury, the victim, surprisingly, managed to take advantage of a moment of distraction from the insects to free himself from the hands of the kidnapper. The willpower there, in that instant, seemed greater than any fear or pain. With a desperate effort, she unraveled, using all her energy to get away from that horror scenario. The agitation of the insects, which had initially targeted her, momentarily dispersed for a brief instant, giving her room to react. At this crucial moment, she did not think twice. She turned in the opposite direction, looking for a quick way out, a hope of escaping from that human and natural nightmare unfolding around her. What once seemed to be a situation of total impotence turned into a real reversal of roles. The malefactor, who thought himself invincible, now saw his escape threatened by a force he had no way to control. His attention, which was previously focused only on avoiding insects, became pure concern as the fear of being hit more seriously began to take over. The courage of the victim, who until then had seemed fragile and vulnerable, proved more powerful than any weapon or threat. She, by luck and by a quick decision, managed to launch herself in the opposite direction, crossing a trail of trees, branches, and dry leaves, which seemed to become natural obstacles on her path to freedom. A sense of hope washed over her, and every step she took seemed stronger than any fear she had felt moments before. It was a mixture of relief, courage, and a burning desire to get to a safe place. Even with her heart racing and her legs shaking, she didn't let panic overwhelm her. On the contrary, an inner force that perhaps she herself did not understand took hold of her mind. In that moment, she realized that momentary vulnerability left room for a force of resistance to emerge, a force that comes from within, which reveals to us that hope is often a decision we can make, even in the worst of circumstances. Meanwhile, the criminal, still under attack from the insects, desperately tried to drive the marimbondos away from his face and body. Their movements were increasingly uncoordinated, their cries of pain and dread echoing through the forest. He had become a vulnerable prey, a victim of his own arrogance, of the moment when he thought he had everything under control. Now he saw his escape plan crumble in the face of a natural force that could not be tamed or manipulated. His escape, which had seemed so safe, had become a struggle for survival, a battle of impotence against a force that, in truth, had always been there, silent, waiting for the right moment to act. That reversal of roles showed us something fundamental. Life is a constant transformation, a journey where the force of good or evil can reveal itself in fractions of seconds. The victim, who seemed fragile, became a symbol of hope and resistance, while the aggressor, who was in control, was defeated by a force that cannot be predicted. The courage of those who, even in the face of fear, decide to fight for their freedom. This dynamic reveals that deep down, our decisions carry a load of impact that we often do not realize at the time, but that manifests itself in surprising ways, challenging our perception of strength and vulnerability. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, as this story shows that true transformation does not only come from what we can see or understand on the surface. It is behind the scenes, in the essence of our choices, in the courage of those who stand up even after an apparent defeat. Because in the journey of life, the impact our actions generate can be greater than we imagine. A quick decision, an attitude of hope, or an act of resistance can turn the game definitively, shaping a new scenario where good often appears just when we least expect it. And just as in that forest, where the fragile managed to break free, we learn that true strength is born from within, from a mentality that recognizes that vulnerability is only a door to the courage to start over. Screams of pain and terror echoed through the woods, breaking the silence that had once reigned there. What seemed to be a silent escape, almost a suspense story hidden in the shade of the trees, turned into an impact scene that caught the attention of residents in the neighborhood. The uncontrolled running of that man, pursued by the marimbondos, became a spectacle of almost surreal drama. People who were nearby, who until then had been following their routines as usual, stopped in fright when they heard the screams and noticed the chaotic movement coming from the forest. It didn't take long for the situation to become a real center of attention, with curious glances heading towards that unusual setting, almost as if it were a live movie scene from a story that no one could imagine happening there in the quiet routine of the city. From that moment on, the public dimension of the event was evident. After all, a person's life, no matter how distant it may seem from routine news, can turn into an instant spectacle. When invisible forces, such as the force of nature, decide to act ruthlessly, people began to gather, some with cell phones in hand, wanting to record that moment of chaos. Others, more frightened, just watched from afar, not understanding exactly what they were witnessing, but realizing that it had too great an emotional impact to be ignored. The scene, which once might have seemed like an isolated episode, now became a symbol of how an individual's vulnerability can be exposed quickly and without warning, especially when external forces, which seem small, such as insects, demonstrate outsized strength. At that moment, the story gained a dimension of live theater, in a narrative that seemed to have been written by a film screenwriter. The kidnapper, who until a few minutes earlier had dominated the situation, now ran in circles, completely defeated by a reaction that he himself did not foresee, a natural force that manifested itself in a moment of maximum vulnerability. The scene of someone desperate, surrounded by insects and screams of pain, became a kind of symbol of a lesson that many are not yet aware exists. The force of nature, silent and patient, shows its impact in a way that no one can ignore. And with each movement of that man, each attempt to escape, the people watching realized the real dimension of a hidden truth, that life is a journey marked by decisions, often invisible, that can trigger unpredictable reactions. That story, which seemed like a simple escape, revealed something much bigger. It showed that the impact of our actions is not limited to the present moment, but reverberates behind the scenes of a narrative that is often only shown when we are already in the midst of chaos. When he tried to flee, believing that everything was under his control, in fact, he had left an open door for forces that he was unaware of to manifest themselves definitively. Public attention, which was previously scattered, has become a kind of witness to a lesson that applies to anyone who is willing to reflect. Because deep down, that man's story shows that our decisions have an impact that goes beyond what we can see at the time, and that the true strength of a transformation lies in our ability to recognize and act on what lies behind the scenes of our own journey. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what seemed like a simple escape has become a lesson in the impact, vulnerability, and invisible force that governs our lives. The reaction of that man, defeated by a natural force, serves as a reminder that no matter how much we try to manipulate or evade our own choices, there will always be elements that can surprise us in ways we didn't imagine. History repeats itself in different situations, in different scenarios, but the lesson remains the same. True transformation is born from a deeper understanding of the impact of decisions, the courage to face our vulnerabilities, and the understanding that the universe in some way always reacts to what we do. At this moment, it becomes clear that this invisible force is constantly in motion, waiting for the right moment to show us that our actions carry consequences that can change everything from one day to the next. And as we watch this scene, we realize that the greatest hidden truth is that our journey is a constant exchange between our choices and the forces at work behind the scenes, often silent but always present, shaping who we are and what we can become. When officers arrived on the scene that unfolded was one of quiet, almost inevitable defeat. The man, who minutes before had seemed to have everything under control in his desperate escape, now found himself completely exhausted, covered in stings, his body marked by all the painful stings that the marimbondos had caused him. His movements were slow, almost instinctive, a reflection of someone who, despite trying to resist, no longer had enough strength to continue fighting. His attitude of arrogance and control had been undone by the ruthless force of nature, which proved to be a true judge of that situation. There was no more escape, no more victory for him, only an immediate punishment, a punishment that arrived quickly and accurately, with no room for arguments or resistance. As they surrounded the man, the officers realized how devastating the impact of that natural reaction had been. His face, marked by tears and sweat, reflected a mixture of physical pain and deep emotional defeat. What once seemed like a threat, a demonstration of power, had become a lesson in humility. The force of nature, silent until then, had played its role relentlessly, showing that every arrogance, every attempt to manipulate the environment or disrespect the limits can turn into a quick and definitive punishment. At that moment, no one there was in any doubt that the impact caused by the insects was more than a simple reaction. It was a direct response to the actions of that man, a hidden truth that becomes evident when our decisions put us in a position of vulnerability. The police officers, when arresting the individual, could clearly observe that he no longer had the strength to resist. His body trembled, his breathing was heavy, and the signs of his wounds, however superficial, showed that his attempt to escape had been utterly thwarted. The lesson of that moment was clear. Every action, no matter how planned or controlled it may seem, always carries an impact that can turn into an irreversible consequence. The arrogance of thinking that one is above natural forces, or that one can manipulate the environment without paying the price, was precisely what led that man to defeat. There was no victory, there was no escape. There was only a swift, just, and inevitable punishment from a force working behind the scenes, often invisible but always present. In the end, the scene served as a powerful reminder that harmony with the environment, with the forces that sustain it, is fundamental. Nature, with her silent strength, needs neither words nor demonstrations of power. She responds directly, with impact, with a justice that we often do not understand at the time, but that is recorded in memory as a life lesson. This experience reinforces that our decisions, our actions, will always have an answer, and that the true impact lies in the awareness that we are not exempt from the consequences. On this journey, learning to respect limits, to recognize our weaknesses, and to understand that everything has its price is what really leads us to an inner transformation. And while the man was taken under escort, silence reigned again in the forest, now charged with deeper reflection. That story, marked by a quick and natural punishment, shows us that, many times, the real punishment does not come from a punishment imposed by someone, but from the very force of life, which manifests itself at the right time, directly, bluntly. It is a reminder that harmony with the world around us and the recognition of boundaries are essential for a more conscious journey, where our actions leave marks that go far beyond the present moment. After all, every phase of impact reveals a learning opportunity, a chance to change our mindset, to strengthen our resistance, and to understand that in life, true power lies in harmony with everything that surrounds us. This lesson, more than anything, serves as an invitation to reflect on our own decisions and the impact they can have behind the scenes of our own history. That story, which seemed like a simple narrative of natural punishment, reveals something much deeper about the complexity of our life journey. When we reflect on the impact of our actions, we realize that we are often navigating a path full of choices that silently leave invisible marks behind the scenes of our destiny. The force of nature, as silently as ruthlessly, teaches us that everything we do, no matter how minor it may seem, has a consequence that can come to the fore at the most unexpected moment. This invisible connection between our decisions and the impact we generate is a true revelation, a hidden truth that few can see when it comes to acting. In that episode, what seemed like a quick escape, an attempt to escape risk, became a lesson that the impact of our choices goes far beyond what we can imagine. Every step taken by that man carried a load of consequences that, when manifested, showed that the universe always finds a way to balance things. Poetic justice, which often looks like an abstract idea or even a philosophical concept, manifests itself in amazing ways, and this case is a clear example of how the impact of an action can turn into a real-life lesson. When the victim was able to free herself, she also freed herself from a cycle of fear and vulnerability, revealing that sometimes all we need is a quick decision, an inner strength that arises precisely in the hour of greatest need. On the other hand, the criminal who believed he was in control saw his arrogance turn into an immediate and merciless punishment. The force of nature, which seemed silent until then, demonstrated that it responds quickly to disrespect and encroachment. There is no potential for manipulation or arrogance that can outweigh the impact of a natural and just reaction. This story reinforces that the true impact of our actions is not only in the present, but reverberates in the long run, behind the scenes of a journey we often ignore. And as I reflect, it becomes clear that the truest transformation is born from a deeper understanding that every decision, no matter how small, has a weight. When we talk about impact, we are talking about an invisible force which we often only notice when it hits us directly. It may seem like a punishment, but in fact, it is a learning opportunity, an invitation to review our attitudes and change our mindset. Life, with its constant revelations, shows us that impact is not a random punishment, but a natural response to the actions we take. And this response, which often comes quickly and relentlessly, is a reminder that justice in its purest form needs no middlemen. It happens behind the scenes, as a force that regulates the balance of the universe and that responds according to our own attitude towards life. This vision leads us to reflect on how much our decisions shape our trajectory. Every choice, every attitude, is a seed that we carry in the present, knowing that sooner or later it will germinate into consequences. The story of that man, with all its drama, teaches us that the impact of our actions is not something we can fully control, but that we can influence with a mindset of respect, awareness, and humility. If we understand that impact is an invisible bridge that links our actions to our destiny, we can act more responsibly, knowing that what we do today shapes what we will experience tomorrow. For this reason, it is reflected that justice is often a force that does not need explanations. It arrives at the right time in a way that only the universe can fully understand. And as we look at this story, we can see that even in the most difficult hours, there is an opportunity for transformation. When we recognize the impact of our actions, we can rise from the most adverse situations and learn to build a new mindset, more aware that everything we do leaves marks on the way. Thus, the journey becomes a continuous lesson of self-knowledge, of respect for the invisible forces that govern life, and of acceptance that in the end, everything we plant in the present will be reflected in the harvest of the future. He said, "That makes sense to me." If you made it this far, it's because somehow this story touched some point of yours, and that's something that really makes a difference. I think we often forget the power that our actions have, even in the small choices of everyday life. When we pay attention to this impact, we are able to act more consciously, knowing that everything we do reverberates in some way. If this content brought you a reflection, how about subscribing to the channel, so we can continue to bring stories and messages that help us see the world and ourselves more clearly. Leave here in the comments a phrase that shows that you have reached the end, such as "I'm with you until the end" or "This message was for me." It is a way to exchange experiences and reinforce this connection that we are building. And if this video made sense, your natural like is a way to value the content and also to strengthen our conversation. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. Thus, we can deepen these reflections even more and continue learning together in a light and natural way. After all, the most important thing is that this space is a place where we can grow and better understand the impact of our actions, always calmly and attentively. Thank you for being with me so far, and until the next content,